Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel you need to not only survive the current apocalypse, but actually enjoy it. And today's video is going to be installment number 2 in our net making video series. Now the last video I made in this series was about the tools necessary to build a cast net, but today's video is going to be the actual materials that the cast net is going to be made out of. Now primarily the very first thing you're going to think about is the string. When you purchase the string for your cast net, it will be called twine or line. When you are making your cast net, you should always refer to it as line. It just sounds more professional because by tradition that's what everybody calls it. Now nets can be made with a variety of sizes of lines. Different net makers, from what I understand, had different ways that they would put their nets together. Some places under a heavy stress would use larger sizes of line, and other places would use smaller sizes of lines. But I think there's ways around that are very feasible. You can make it with a medium size, a mid-size line, and do the whole net from top to bottom with one line. That way you only have to buy one roll of line. Now, to attach your net to your hand, you're going to need rope, and that's the second item that we're going to talk about. The rope that goes around your hand is actually called a hand line, and you'll make it into a little slip knot, and you'll put it around your wrist, and that is the rope that you will actually use to pull your net in. At the bottom of your net will be your lead line, and this is going to have to be a relatively small rope because you're going to be putting it through some leads that have a hole that's only about maybe a 1/4 inch round. So you can't put a heavy-duty rope through a 1/4 inch hole. That being the case, you're not going to be able to use the same kind of rope on your weight line or lead line as you're going to use on your hand line, because sometimes you will pull in a net that is so full that you're going to need a pretty heavy-duty rope. Everybody I know who has ever caught fish in a cast net has a story to tell about having to call all their friends to come help them pull their net in because they had so many fish. It's not uncommon. In fact, there's even a story about that in the Bible that most of us are familiar with. The next thing that you're going to need is your hardware. Now at the top of the net, where your hand line connects to the net, you're going to need what's called swivels if you're making a Spanish style net, or you're going to need what's called a horn. And we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in a minute. At the bottom of your net, you're going to need whatever you're going to weigh the net down with. Some people will use chain, some people will use lead weights, and we'll talk about the differences in those in a minute. But for right now, this video will tell you everything that you need to make a net with. All the materials that are going to go into your net, and it'll be your decision as to exactly what specifications you want on those materials. But we'll give you everything you need to think about as you make those decisions. Okay, the first thing we're going to talk about is the line that we're going to use to make our net. And before we start talking about the line, I'm going to show you the box that I use to carry my line. Now this is a box that had Epsom salt in it from Sam's Club. If you're in the US and if you use Epsom salt, then it would be wise to just get your Epsom salt at Sam's so you can get a free line carrying box. I'll show you why. Everything I use for my line fits in here, including this really neat spindle thing that my instructor made for me for loading up my needles. So I can put this on here, and instead of having this spool bouncing around on the floor as I'm loading my needles up, it can just be coming off. Now I'm not saying you should make one of these because it is problematic. As you're taking the line off, the line will fall to the bottom. Once it does that, it's going to wrap around this. You got to pull the line off, and it kind of slows you down sometimes. But it is better than just seeing it flop around on the floor. Now if you notice, everything in here is either green or white because I'm in the US. The only bonded line you can get in the US is in either green or white. Now sometimes you'll come across different colors of green and white. According to the guy that's teaching me this, you don't want to get this if you don't have to, because this has a much tighter bonding agent. It'll cause your knots to hold together better. The bonding agent itself is actually, and by the way, that's not necessarily gospel, because even though I have a lot of respect for the guy that's teaching me, he may have just gotten a bad roll at one time and, you know, felt like that's the way that color is all the time. But the reason you want the bonding agent is so that when you tie your knots, they stay together. Now, as you become more proficient, you may want to tie knots out of anything, but nylon itself is extremely slippery. It's very easy to spill a knot if you're tying with nylon that is not bonded. Now, the difference will be quite noticeable instantly. When you cut your line, this is what it's going to do. It's just going to turn into a bunch of fibers. Bonded line won't do that because the bonding agent is actually there to hold the line together, but just one of its extra benefits is the fact that it will hold your knots together. Here's a label. I saved this label off the last roll I got. That's a number 6. And if you notice, it says 100% nylon. Nothing else is important on here except the word bonded. 100% nylon and bonded. If you're just starting out making nets, you don't want to experiment with your very first net. Just take my word for it, you want 100% bonded nylon. Now, I've got number 6, and that's my favorite. That seems to be what I'm making everything out of now. But that's not necessarily the best way. If you are making a net, you have to think of it as a parachute. You want your net to sink to the bottom as quickly as possible so that fish cannot get out from underneath your net before it reaches the bottom. If you make your net with very thick string, it makes it like a parachute. Very, very thin string puts up very little resistance. So a net with thin string will fall quicker than a net with thick string. But the problem is that the thinner the string is, the weaker the net is. So if you catch a shark, or perhaps a barracuda, depending on where you live, or around here we have garfish, alligator gars, they will tear your net to pieces before you get them out of there. And I don't know that there's really any size of string that will keep that from happening altogether, but I suspect that if you have a net made out of number 3, it's going to get tore all to pieces. I don't think that a net made out of number 6 is going to have that kind of a problem. Now, in the past, people made nets out of natural fibers. This is twisted jute. You can also use something like cotton or something like hemp, but those nets would probably be better for decoration purposes only. In the past, there may have been a technology that was used to hold those nets together longer, to make them last longer. Right now, that's a dead technology if it ever existed. I know for a fact that when Jesus was alive, he was a fisherman and his nets were made of camel hair. The reason I know that is because he spoke of camel hair as if it was a material for sewing with. And archaeologists are constantly pulling up these little rocks. They have holes bored through them. And recently they pulled up a bunch that had camel hair running through them. So they always knew those rocks were weights for fishing nets, but until they actually found some with camel hair in them, they didn't really know anything about the fishing nets. Now we know at the very least that they were made of camel hair. And there are other cultures, Native American cultures, that have found fishing nets that are made of tree fibers or plant fibers. And you just can't imagine that somebody would spend a year making a net and just get a couple of months of use out of it. They had to have had some kind of way of preserving those nets. Okay, now we're going to talk in a little bit more detail about net dip. You'll notice that the two nets that I'm showing you right now appear to be different colors. And you may prefer to have this color, this white and green, as opposed to this color. But I promise you that no matter what you do, you're not going to be able to keep a white and green net. That's just not possible, because this stuff, once you take it off of the roll, it starts changing colors real quick. That white is going to look like a real dingy color of gray no matter where I store this thing. So you can have a dingy gray and green net, or you can have a net like this. It's light green and dark green. But this dark green on here is the exact same line that made this dark green over here. And the light green over here is the same line that made the white line on that net. Now, we're going to take a very unique opportunity here to show you just how deeply this net dip penetrates. This is a white rope. It's a hand line. If you notice, the loop is missing off of it. That's because the man that ordered that net requested that Norman put a 30-foot line on it for fishing off of a bridge. There's a couple of things that are wrong with that. One, it's almost impossible to throw a net with a 30-foot line unless you're on a bridge where you can tie the line off somewhere and not have it on your hand. And another thing is, if you're on a bridge and you throw a net and the net gets hung up on something, you just lost the net. You can get it off of a piece of debris by jerking on it, but you're going to tear your net all up, and I would not use a handmade net to do that. So, in any case, the end of this line is gone because I just finished building a braille net and I didn't have any rope. And being constantly irritated by that 30-foot rope, I went ahead and cut it off. So now we've got a 15-foot line on this net, and we've got a 15-foot line on the net that I have hanging in my teacher's shop, drying right now. We've just dipped it. But I want to show you, this is a white line. I want to show you just how deep this stuff penetrates. If you notice, it's green all the way through. I don't know where that's focusing. Hopefully you can see that. Net Dip is a preservative, and it worked very well as a preservative for cotton nets. I really don't know that it does much of anything for nylon, because nylon nets are pretty much self-preserved by being nylon. As long as you don't lay them in the sun or lay them on hot concrete. You know, if you're fishing on a seawall and you get done fishing, you need to put your net up. Don't lay it down on the seawall. The more time it has in contact with hot concrete, the shorter the life is going to be of your net. But the preservative that they use is actually like a form of paint. It feels like paint, it smells like paint, and you use paint thinner to thin it. The paint thinner acts as a secondary bonding agent. So as much emphasis as I put on using bonded nylon so that your knots bond together, I want to put as much emphasis on using a net dip to finish bonding your knots after they're tied. I can't really show you in video what that looks like. In fact, I don't know if I can even see that with my naked eye. But I do know that I have had nets that have had knots just spill for no reason after the net's made. And I can't go back in time and see if there was a mistake I made when I was tying the knot. All I know is that they do spill. But I have never, ever experienced a knot spill on a net that's been dipped. Net dip. It's only about $25 a gallon. We'll cover how to apply that later on. Okay, now we're going to take a little closer look at our line, and I've got two representative rolls here. These are 1 pound rolls. This roll has not been used, so this is what the size of your roll is going to be like when you get it. This one's had a little bit taken off of it. From what I understand, the smaller line will get you about 5 nets out of a roll. You'll get maybe 2 out of a larger line, maybe 3. And so the difference in price is not going to be that much, because basically everybody that sells this nylon line sells a roll of the fat line for $15 and a roll of the skinny line for $15. So you're gonna save money, but it's not enough. When you're building a net, you really need to think about the architecture of the net and not worry so much about the cost of the line, because it's almost inconsequential. When you get your line, you'll have a sticker in telling you what size it is. First thing you need to do is write on what size it is, because that sticker is going to fall off, and when you've got a whole bunch of line, it becomes virtually impossible to remember what sizes they are, and you can't just look at them and tell. I've been working with this for a while, and if there wasn't a number 4 written in there, I would have no idea this was a number 4. But it's important that you be professional when you start buying this stuff. The difference as it appears in the net may not seem like much, but when you got your hands on it, it does. This is a lot stiffer up here because this is a number 9, the dark color. The light color is a number 4. Now, I'll try to show you the difference, and basically what I'm showing you is the lack of difference. When you look at these, it's very difficult to tell which one is a 4 and which one is a 9, but the knots seem to be a lot more prominent. Especially when you're knitting, these knots will actually bother you because you don't want big knots in your net. That's where your hang-ups happen. And a hang-up is when you pull your net out of the water, you're always going to have the bottom of the net kind of crumpled up. And you got to shake it until everything becomes loose, otherwise it won't open the next time you throw it. And sometimes you'll have one place with a really big knot or too many knots where the leads just always hang up, and it's irritating. So you want to have as small a knot as possible, as few knots as possible, and you can achieve that with a lighter line. Okay, now that I've talked about the different kinds of line and the different sizes of line available for making a cast net, we're going to talk about the practical application of that information. And I have with me a Spanish style cast net that is 10 feet long. We're going to look at that. Now, I already said that the smaller the line is, the quicker your net will sink. But a small line is not going to be as strong as a big line, large line. So we're going to tell you why you would use different size lines. This net is a 10-foot cast net. And by 10 foot, I mean that from where the rope connects to the bag, or to the bottom of the net, is a distance of 10 feet. That means when you throw the net and it opens out, you're going to actually have a 20-foot net. So just know that if you purchase or make a 6-foot net, It's not going to be 6 foot open. When it's open, it'll be 12 foot. What that means is, since the center of the circle is going to be very small, you're not going to have as many pieces of string to hold up the weight of the bottom of the circle. This net, and this is the kind of net we are going to start with, has 33 meshes at the top where it connects to the rope. A mesh is the holes in the net, and 33 of them will make a perfect net if you are building a net that you want to open like a pancake. And the way that works is, every so often we're going to add what's called a widening row. In that widening row, we're going to add an extra mesh every so often. So even though your net may have 33 meshes here, down here it's going to have 44, because 33 and 11 is 44. Down here it's going to have 55, because 44 and 11 is 55. And you'll work until you get to the bottom. On some nets you'll have over 1,000 meshes at the bottom. That'll hold a lot of fish. That puts a lot of stress on the top. This net appears to be light green and dark green, but it's actually white and green. This net has been dipped in a green preservative. You can purchase preservatives in different colors. The reason I say you should use green is not based on my own personal experience, but from what I've heard from others. The reds and the blues are basically for the fishing industry. Those particular dips are sticky after they dry. And you know, if you're making a net to give to somebody that they're going to store in their car, or they're going to hang on the wall when they're not fishing, it could leave a red or blue residue in your car or on your wall. So this green is the best possible dip for somebody that wants to show off their net, or if just for an individual that's not going to keep their net in the hold of a ship. If you notice, the net is also green, and the reason the net's green, dark green, is because that's a number 9 line, and the number 9 that my teacher was using when he made this net was green, and the number 4 that he had available was white. And then I don't really think there's much more to it than that, because he's not a guy that cares about colors. When you get to the bottom of a Spanish net, you have to build into it a feature called a bag. This is the bag. The part that looks really like it's just a cluster of knots is actually where the net curves back into itself, and that's what catches the fish. The problem you're going to have here, I don't know if you can see it, there's what's called a brill line in there. That line right there connects to the lead line, and that's what forms your bag. Somebody in the past must have realized that when they were doing net repairs, they were doing an inordinate amount of net repairs in this area where the bag was tied onto the net. So by tradition, here on the Gulf Coast, nets like this are made with thicker string where the bag attached. So you've got this line here that's a number 9, you got 4 above it and 4 below it. It's just one of the reasons you may want to use different size lines with your net. Now the first net you're making is not going to be 20 foot wide. It's going to be probably 12. So you're going to make a 6 foot net or smaller. There are not going to be near the stresses that you're going to have on a net like this, which is 20 foot wide. So you could probably get away with making your entire net out of number 6 without any concerns for the part where you're going to sew your bag in, or the part where you're going to connect your rope. So it's up to you. You'll have to figure out as you become experienced what kind of lines you prefer. Everybody has a different style. Alright, the next thing you're going to have to purchase that you can't get out of is a rope. A couple of ropes, in fact. The rope for your weights at the bottom of the net, as well as the rope to attach your hand line to the net. That's the actual rope that you'll be holding on to when you cast your net. If you're making the body of your net out of synthetic nylon, then you would want to use synthetic materials for your rope as well. That way you don't have a rope rotting off of your net every couple of years. And in fact, the whole thing could actually last for several lifetimes. But there is a difference in the kind of rope you can get, and you can use whatever you want. But if you use this, which is a 3-strand line, you can do something called splicing. And for someone who's a sail maker or a sailor or a net maker, splicing is one of the things you can do that impresses people. So, you know, it just makes sense to use, at least for your hand line, to use a 3-strand rope. Now, a braided rope cannot be spliced. The only way you can attach a braided rope is to use knots or what's called lashing. And this one just happens to have lashing on it. In fact, my teacher was sweeping the floor and he was getting ready to throw this in the trash. I don't even know why he made it, but I grabbed it just because I thought that was kind of cool. But when you're on a net, it's going to make a difference in the appearance of the net. It's not really going to make a difference in the function of it. So this is your choice. Whatever color you choose, whether it's 3-line or braided, doesn't matter. The important thing is, will it support the net? And if you're putting leads in it, will it fit through the hole that's in your lead weight? Okay, now it's time to talk about a little bit of specialized hardware that you'll need for your net that you probably aren't going to use anywhere else. And in particular, we'll start by talking about swivels and horns. Now, this is called a horn. That goes at the top of a braille net. This is what you would put at the top of a Spanish net. Traditionally, we didn't have horns. When I was a kid, I had a braille net. My braille net was made with a sail thimble. You can type that in, sail, like a sailboat, thimble like you put on your finger, and you'll find sail thimbles. They kind of look like a grommet, but they're designed for use of rope on sails, and that's all that people had back in the old days. This is a relatively new invention. Probably around the 1990s they started making these available in the US. It's a piece of plastic, it's imported, it doesn't look very traditional. One thing I do like about it is it divides your brails into 4 sections so you don't get as many knots, but it's still at this point, I am about to make a purchase online of some sail thimbles just because I want my nets to look more traditional. Now, when you start your net, it would be a good idea to decide right from the beginning whether you're going to make a Spanish net or a braille net. Because if you don't, you're going to have to make your net on a rope. And you see, we just tie this rope to a chair or whatever and start knitting. And this is what we get. Now, it's not going to, when you do that, that means you have your choice when you're done with the net of how you're going to mount the net to your hand line. This is a Spanish net. It was made on a rope. If you notice, it really doesn't look very pretty up here. Now, it's going to function perfectly, and it's going to last a lifetime. But for me, this is like a work of art, which means I want my stuff to look really nice. So I decided on this net that it was going to be a Spanish net. I just went ahead and knitted the net straight to the swivel. Good thing about knitting it to a rope, if you should, for any reason, just decide later on you want to make a braille net, then you can use this. But if you do this, you are stuck. You can only make a Spanish style net. And I'll show you how you attach the net to your horn just so you can think about why everything I'm saying is true. You'll take this rope and tie it loosely and just slowly work your net around the horn until it looks kind of like a skirt. You'll get it all the way around to the other side. And in fact, before you even do this, you'll probably sew your net up. Or no, actually you put it on the horn first, then you sew it up. But in any case, once you get it all the way around there and you're pretty sure you got it exactly even, you can take and tie this off with a square knot, and you have a braille net. You're ready to put your brails on. So that's how that works. So those are the only 2 choices you have when you start your net, is whether you're going to make a braille net or a Spanish net, whether you're going to use a horn or a swivel. When you get to the bottom of the net, you have to decide whether or not you want to put chain in or you want to put in lead. The only time that decision is important is when you go to purchase your weight material. I decided early on I was never going to make a net with chains because growing up as a kid I never saw a net with chains, and I wanted stuff like when I was growing up. Well, since then I figured out that the chains are a lot more popular, seem to catch more fish, so I will be doing that. Not only that, but I want to learn everything I can about nets, and there's no way to avoid putting a chain in a net if you want to call yourself a net maker. Now, when you purchase your rope, I've already told you that you got to buy a rope for your hand line, which would be like this, and you have to buy a rope for your lead line, which is like this. And as you can see, this will pass easily through the hole in your lead, whereas this will not. So you really can't get out of buying 2 different sizes of line. Now I'm going to show you the difference in having a braided line and having a three strand line. This is actually 3-strand line, And I guess I should have set this up so I could show you where it's all tied together. But you can use lashings to connect the two ends of your lead line. But if you have a 3-strand line, you can actually splice one end into another, just as I showed you on that other piece of rope earlier where we spliced it back into itself. There's two different ways to splice. You can take and splice a loop, or you can actually splice the two ends. And if you splice the two ends, the only person that's going to know that probably is you. But it's really nice when I'm making something to be able to make it in such a way that a person cannot figure out how it was made. And if you splice the two ends into each other and maybe slip one weight as far down into the splicing as possible, no one's going to be able to tell how you put that lead line together. In part 1 of this series, I showed you every tool you would need to make a cast net. Today we talked about all of the materials that would be necessary to make a cast net. Now, if you've ever noticed, whenever you travel somewhere, go to the doctor's office, bus station, there will always be somebody around there that's knitting or crocheting or doing some kind of work with the line in their lap. And all the tools that they have, including the piece they're working on, will fit into a very, very small package. Cast nets are not quite like that. If you go online and type in the phrase net thrower or net fishing on any video hosting channel like YouTube, you will see videos of men throwing nets that are as big as a house. There's no way in the world you could bring a net like that into the doctor's office and start knitting. One of the problems you're going to have with a net is that you can't just use your hands. You don't just put a pile of string in your hands and start working. You have to have an attachment point to something. Now, if you're in a situation where it's a row of seats, you can sometimes just throw a string over the seat in front of you and work off of that. But eventually your net will get too big. But every net that I've ever seen starts off about this big, and it takes quite a while to get the net that big. So if you're in a doctor's office or something, there's nothing that could need to stop you from starting a net, except all of your tools. Everything I showed you seemed to be quite bulky. This is the box that I carry my string in. But you do not need 6 different types of string and sizes of string to start a net. You only need really one roll of string. And so my string actually will fit in my regular tool pouch. And also, I don't need this many needles to do a net. You only need 1 or 2. Same thing with gauges. You really only need 1 gauge to make a net. Now, if you want to travel out of town and you're going to be gone for a month, or you want to work on your net, you're going to be in a hotel room, it's not a big deal to bring that entire tool bag. And inside of that tool bag, you can carry your string as well as your net. This is a Crystal Light container, and as you can see, your whole net will fit in there. Now, obviously, once you get the leads on, it won't fit in there, but before that time, before you attach your hand line and attach your leads, your net will easily fit into an extremely small size package. When I first opened this, something came out that reminded me. This is just plain old, vinyl tape that you use to mark the lot, your property line, or where you're going to pour slabs, something like that. What I use it for is to mark spots on my net that I got to go back and fix, or to mark the length of a net. When you're knitting, you might get to 4 feet pretty quick, but once you get to 4 feet, the work really slows down. So I'll always mark exactly 4 feet. So every day when I finish working on my net, all I have to do is measure from that and add 4 feet to whatever my measurement is. And I'll put another one at 5 feet, another one at 6 feet, depending on how long my net is. I'll have those going all the way down the net, marking every foot. Another thing is your lead weights. Now, this is enough lead weights to do a very large net or 2 small nets. And this is just a bank bag like you purchase at Walmart for carrying money. And it's stout enough that it'll hold your leads. In fact, I actually keep enough leads to do an entire net on the line ready to go, just because I had the line and I had the weights. Well, hopefully from the first video I made in this series and this particular video, you can see that it doesn't take a whole lot to get into the hobby of net making. And it's not just a hobby, it's actually something that could be a marketable skill. As long as there are plenty of really cheap factory-made nets out there that you have to compete with, your marketable skill isn't going to generate much of an income. But it's still something that you could do in an emergency. And a lot of what we consider marketable skills are not things you can do in an emergency. When we experience some kind of an economic collapse or some kind of a change in the hierarchy of the system, a lot of what we consider to be marketable skills suddenly become pointless endeavors. But another thing about this is that it's just a good feeling to know you can do something that no one else can do. Now, where I live, which is close to the coast, there are a lot of people still alive that can remember their fathers, grandfathers, great-grandfathers making nets. And so when you do this publicly, you get a lot of admiration, because these people recognize that what you do is unique, and they love the person that they used to know that did this. And so it's actually something that's quite honorable. You know, you can't generally tell somebody that you're a really good golfer and get any admiration from them unless they're basically one of civilization's mindless drones. Most human beings are not that impressed with golf. But the fact is, if you're doing this, you're not hurting anybody, and you're actually enriching yourself. And one day when everything goes away and you're the only person that knows how to make a net, you could actually be quite valuable to whatever society is left over. That's it. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.